someone is crazy in love with you, and the reason will disturb you more than it flatters you. Because it has almost nothing to do with who you think you are. It has everything to do with what you accidentally awakened inside them. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. You believe love is built on attraction, shared values, maybe timing, but that belief is comforting. And comfort is usually a lie the mind tells to avoid something darker. Because the truth, love, real, obsessive, almost irrational love, is born in the unconscious, not in logic. And you, without realizing it, stepped into a part of their psyche they've been hiding from themselves for years. But here's the truth. You didn't just make them feel good, you made them feel seen in a way that terrified them. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because when someone feels seen at that depth, they don't just admire you, they attach to you, violently, completely. Most people don't see this. They think being loved means being liked. But what's happening here is something far more intense. You triggered a recognition of something buried, something repressed, something they were never supposed to confront. And somehow, you became the mirror, not by trying, not by performing, but by simply being something they didn't expect, something they couldn't control, something they couldn't categorize, and that broke their internal structure. Because their mind was built to protect them, to keep certain desires hidden, to suppress certain needs, to deny certain truths. But then you appeared, and suddenly, the walls didn't hold anymore. And this is where it gets even darker, because what they feel for you is not clean. It's not simple. It's not even fully conscious. It's a mixture of longing, fear, projection, and something dangerously close to obsession. You didn't just attract them, you disrupted them. And disruption, in the unconscious mind, feels like destiny. But here's what you haven't realized yet. You didn't do something obvious. You didn't say something perfect. You didn't follow a formula. You violated an expectation. And that's what hooked them. Because the human psyche is addicted to patterns and completely destabilized by unpredictability. You became unpredictable in a way that felt meaningful, not chaotic, not random, but symbolically charged, as if you represented something more than yourself. And that's when the projection began. They started seeing you not as a person, but as an answer to a question they never consciously asked, an answer to a void they didn't know how to name. And once that happens, they don't fall in love with you, they fall into you. And this is where it becomes almost impossible for them to detach, because detaching from you would mean confronting the part of themselves you awakened. And that's something the mind resists at all costs. So instead, they hold on to you, even if it confuses them, even if it hurts them, even if it makes no rational sense. But here's the truth that will unsettle you. You didn't just awaken something beautiful. You also awakened something unstable. Because repressed desires don't emerge gently. They erupt. They distort perception. They blur boundaries. They create emotional intensity that feels like truth, but isn't always grounded in reality. And you can feel it, can't you? That strange intensity in the way they look at you. That subtle tension in how they react. That feeling that something deeper is happening, even when nothing is being said. But here's what makes it even more complicated. They don't fully understand it either, because this isn't happening in their conscious mind. It's happening beneath it, in the place where logic doesn't exist, where contradictions can coexist, where love and fear become indistinguishable. And that's why their behavior feels inconsistent. One moment, they seem completely drawn to you. The next moment, they pull back, not because their feelings changed, but because their defenses activated, because something inside them whispered, "This is dangerous. This is exposing something I'm not ready to face." And this creates a loop, an unconscious push and pull. Desire, followed by fear. Closeness, followed by distance. Intensity, followed by confusion. And you're caught in it, whether you realize it or not, because part of you feels it too. That something about this connection is different, heavier, more charged, almost like it's pulling something out of you as well. And this is where the real question begins. What exactly did you do to trigger something this powerful? Because it wasn't random, it wasn't luck, and it definitely wasn't accidental. There was a moment, a specific moment, where something in them shifted, where something inside them recognized you. And once that recognition happened, there was no going back. But here's the part that most people never understand. That recognition wasn't about who you are on the surface. It was about what you represent in their unconscious mind. And what you represent is something they've been searching for, avoiding, and needing, all at the same time. And until you understand what that is, you won't understand why they can't let you go, or why this connection feels so intense, so confusing, so impossible to define. Because the truth is, you didn't just make them fall in love. You activated something they've been suppressing for years. And once something like that wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. It waits. It grows. It demands. And eventually, it forces a confrontation. But the real question is, when that moment comes, will they face it, or will they lose themselves trying to escape it? They told themselves it was nothing, a passing feeling, a temporary fascination, something that would fade if they just gave it time. But time didn't dissolve it. Time fed it. Because what they're experiencing isn't built on surface-level attraction. It's rooted in something far older, something buried deep within the unconscious. And the unconscious doesn't forget. It waits. It watches. It collects fragments of unresolved desires and stores them in silence until something or someone forces them back into awareness. And somehow, that someone became you. But here's the truth. You didn't enter their life as a person. You entered it as a trigger, a psychological key, a symbol that unlocked something they spent years trying not to feel. And this is where it gets dangerous, because once the unconscious is activated, it doesn't ask for permission. It takes control, quietly, subtly, but completely. Most people don't see this. They assume obsession looks obvious. Constant messages, desperate actions, overwhelming intensity. But real obsession, it hides behind restraint, behind silence, behind the illusion of control. Because the deeper the feeling, the more the psyche tries to suppress it. And suppression only makes it stronger. So what do? They analyze you, overthink every interaction, replay conversations in their mind like a broken loop that refuses to stop, not because they want to, but because they can't. Because you've become tied to something unresolved within them, something unfinished. And unfinished psychological patterns are the most powerful forces in human behavior. But here's what you haven't realized yet. The intensity you feel from them, it's not just about you. It's about what you represent. Because, in the language of the unconscious, people don't fall in love with individuals. They fall in love with symbols. And you became a symbol of something they lost, or something they never had, or something they were taught they didn't deserve. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable for them, because loving you forces them to confront a contradiction, a split within themselves. Part of them wants to move closer to you, but another part resists with equal force. Not because they don't care, but because caring exposes something they've been avoiding their entire life. And this is where it gets even darker, because that internal conflict doesn't stay contained. It leaks through hesitation, through mixed signals, through moments of intense closeness followed by unexplained distance. And you feel it, don't you? That inconsistency, that emotional whiplash, that sense that something is pulling them toward you, while something else is pulling them away. But here's the truth. They're not confused about you. They're overwhelmed by themselves, because you've activated a part of them that doesn't follow logic, a part that operates on emotion, memory, and suppressed desire, a part that remembers things they consciously forgot. And once that part is awake, it starts asking questions they can't easily answer. Questions like, why does this feel so familiar? Why does this scare me this much? Why do I feel like I need this, but also want to run from it? And this is where their mind begins to fracture. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, silently, because the conscious mind wants stability, but the unconscious craves resolution. And resolution often requires chaos. So what happens next? They start creating distance, not because they want to lose you, but because they're trying to regain control. They convince themselves that stepping back will quiet the feeling. That space will bring clarity. That time will weaken the attachment. But here's the truth. Distance doesn't kill unconscious attachment. It intensifies it, because absence removes reality and replaces it with imagination. And imagination is where obsession thrives. Now you're no longer just a person in their life. You've become an idea, an image, a projection of everything they can't fully understand. And projections are powerful because they don't have limits. They grow, they evolve, they become more perfect, more meaningful, more necessary. And this is where it gets almost impossible for them to break free, because they're no longer attached to who you are. They're attached to what you've become in their mind, and what you've become is something they can't easily replace. But here's what makes this even more intense. They don't trust it. They don't trust how strongly they feel. They don't trust how quickly it happened. They don't trust how deeply it affects them, because anything this powerful must have a cost, and their psyche knows it. So it creates resistance, doubt, fear, not to destroy the feeling, but to protect them from what the feeling might demand. Because if they fully accept what they feel for you, they would have to confront everything they've been avoiding, every suppressed desire, every unresolved wound, every hidden truth. And that's not something the mind does willingly. So instead, they stay in the middle, pulled in both directions, wanting you, but resisting you, thinking about you, but avoiding you, feeling everything, but expressing almost nothing. And this creates a tension that doesn't go away. It builds, slowly, quietly, until it reaches a point where something has to give. But here's the question that should disturb you. What happens when that tension becomes too much to contain? Because it will. It always does. The human psyche cannot hold that level of contradiction forever. Eventually, it breaks. But when it breaks, it doesn't always break in a way you expect. Sometimes it leads to confession. Sometimes it leads to withdrawal. Sometimes it leads to actions that seem irrational, even self-destructive. Because when the unconscious takes over, logic becomes irrelevant, and emotion becomes law. And that's the moment everything changes. The moment where they can no longer pretend this is just a feeling. the moment where they have to face what this really is. But here's what you need to understand. That moment is coming, whether they're ready or not, because what you triggered in them isn't temporary. It's not surface level. It's not something they can simply ignore. It's something that demands resolution. And resolution always comes at a cost. The only question is, what are they willing to lose to avoid facing what they feel for you? At some point, the mind stops negotiating. Because suppression has limits, and what they feel for you has already crossed that limit. You can sense it in the silence between interactions. That heavy, almost suffocating tension that doesn't disappear, it just waits. Because what's happening inside them isn't stable anymore. It's building pressure. And pressure in the human psyche always looks for a release. But here's the truth. Release doesn't always come as clarity. Sometimes it comes as collapse. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable for them. Because now, it's no longer just attraction or curiosity. It's confrontation. A confrontation with parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. Parts shaped by old wounds, old rejections, old beliefs that whispered, "You are not enough, you are too much, you are unsafe to love." And then you appeared, and without trying, you contradicted all of it. But here's the problem. The psyche doesn't accept contradiction easily. It resists it, fights it, distorts it. Because accepting you would mean rewriting everything they believe about themselves. And that's not a gentle process. It's violent, internally violent. So instead of integrating the feeling, they fracture around it. One part of them moves closer to you, craving connection, craving the intensity, craving the feeling of finally being seen. But another part pulls back with equal force, whispering things they don't fully understand. This isn't safe. This will hurt you. This will expose you. And this is where it gets even darker, because the closer they feel to you, the more exposed they feel within themselves. And exposure to the unconscious mind feels like danger. Not emotional danger, existential danger. Because you're not just someone they like, you've become a threat to their internal structure, a threat to the identity they built to survive. And survival identities do not dissolve easily. They defend themselves, aggressively, suddenly, sometimes destructively. So what do? They start creating narratives. Stories to explain why this connection isn't what it feels like. Maybe it's just temporary. Maybe it's not real. Maybe I'm overthinking. But here's the truth. They're not trying to understand it. They're trying to contain it. Because understanding it would mean admitting something they're not ready to face. That this, whatever this is real. And it's deeper than anything they've experienced before. But here's where the tension becomes almost unbearable. Because no matter how much they rationalize it, their body doesn't listen. Their subconscious doesn't listen. That pull toward you, it doesn't weaken. It intensifies, quietly, relentlessly, like something inside them is insisting. This matters. This is important. This cannot be ignored. And ignoring it starts to cost them, emotionally, mentally, even physically. Because unexpressed emotion doesn't disappear. It transforms. It turns into restlessness, into anxiety, into that constant feeling that something is missing, even when everything else seems fine. And you become the center of that feeling, not because they want you to be, but because their psyche has linked you to something essential, something they can't replace with anything else. And this is where things begin to slip. Small cracks at first, moments where their control falters, where they almost say something almost reveal something, almost let you see how deep this really goes. But then they pull back, harder than before. Because now they're scared of themselves, scared of how much they feel, scared of how little control they actually have. And this creates a cycle that becomes increasingly unstable. The closer they get, the more they panic. The more they pull away, the stronger the feeling grows. And eventually, this cycle starts to break them. Not externally, they still appear composed, still functional, still in control. But internally, there's chaos, because you've created a psychological paradox they can't solve. They want you, but wanting you threatens them. They feel connected to you, but connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what their defenses were built to avoid. So now they're stuck between desire and fear, between truth and denial, between moving forward and running away. And here's the part that most people never realize. This isn't just emotional tension, it's identity tension. Because if they move toward you, they have to become someone new, someone more open, more exposed, more honest, and that version of themselves feels unfamiliar, unstable, even dangerous. But if they move away from you, they don't escape the feeling. They carry it with them. It follows them, quietly, constantly, turning into regret, into longing, into that persistent question, what if I let something real slip away? And that question is what begins to break them. Because now, there's no safe option. Only two painful choices. Face what they feel, or spend the rest of their time trying to forget it. And forgetting isn't as easy as they hoped. Because you're not just a memory. You've become embedded in their unconscious. A symbol, a trigger, a reminder of something they can't fully name. And the more they try to suppress it, the more it resurfaces in dreams, in random thoughts, in moments of silence where everything else fades, and you remain. And this is where the pressure reaches its peak. Because the psyche can only endure so much contradiction before it demands resolution. And resolution doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it comes as a breaking point, a moment where everything they've been holding back spills out, uncontrolled, unfiltered, unavoidable. But here's the question that lingers right before that moment. What happens when they can no longer hold it in? Because that moment is closer than they think. There is a moment, right before everything breaks, where the mind goes silent. Not peaceful silence, not calm, but a tense, suffocating stillness, like something inside them has stopped pretending. And that's when the truth rises, unfiltered, unprotected, impossible to ignore. Because at this point, they can't run anymore. They've tried distance, they've tried distraction, they've tried convincing themselves that what they feel isn't real. But reality doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient, and what they feel for you has become undeniable. But here's the part that hangs everything. They finally realize this was never about controlling their feelings. It was about confronting what those feelings reveal, and what those feelings reveal terrifies them. Because you didn't just make them fall in love, you exposed the part of them that has been starving. For connection, for validation, for something real. And this is where the illusion collapses. Because they can no longer hide behind logic. They can no longer pretend it's just attraction. They can no longer escape the question that's been haunting them. Why this person? Why does this feel like something I've been waiting for? Without knowing it. And the answer is not simple, it's not comfortable. It's not even entirely rational, because what they feel for you is tied to something unfinished in their past, something they buried so deeply They almost forgot it existed. But the unconscious never forgets. It waits for a mirror. And you became that mirror. But here's the truth that hits them hardest. You didn't just reflect who they are. You reflected who they could have been. And that realization cuts deeper than anything else. Because now, loving you isn't just about wanting you. It's about grieving a version of themselves they never allowed to exist. A version that was open. A version that wasn't afraid. A version that didn't run when something real appeared. And this is where it becomes almost unbearable. Because every moment they spend avoiding you feels like a betrayal of that version. And every moment they move toward you feels like stepping into something unknown, something they don't know how to control. But here's where everything shifts. They realize there is no safe path, no middle ground, no way to feel this deeply without being changed by it. So now they're faced with a decision that isn't really a decision, because either way, they lose something. If they walk away, they lose you. But more importantly, they lose the chance to become the person they glimpsed through you. And that loss doesn't fade. It lingers. It turns into regret. Into that quiet, persistent ache that shows up years later in moments they can't explain. But if they move toward you, they lose control. They lose the carefully constructed identity that kept them safe. They lose the illusion that they can avoid vulnerability. And for the human psyche, losing control feels like losing everything. And this is the breaking point. The moment where all defenses collapse, where all the rationalizations fall apart, where the truth stands alone, undeniable. They are not just in love with you, they are being transformed by you. And transformation is never gentle. It destroys before it rebuilds. It strips away illusions before revealing truth. It forces confrontation before allowing connection. And that's why this feels so intense, so overwhelming, so impossible to ignore. Because this was never meant to be simple. It was meant to change them. But here's the final truth, the one they can no longer escape. They didn't choose to feel this way, but they will choose what they do with it. And that choice will define them, not just in this moment, but in every moment that follows. Because people don't remember the feelings they ran from. They remember the ones that changed them. And you are not just a feeling in their life. You are a turning point. A fracture in their old identity. A doorway into something they've been avoiding for years. And now that doorway is open, it will never fully close. Because once the unconscious is exposed, once the truth is felt, once the illusion is broken, there is no returning to who they were before, only forward or away. And both paths come with a cost. But only one path leads to something real. And deep down, they already know which one it is.